In my flock, I only keep heritage breed chickens, and I do that for several reasons. So today we're going to talk about why heritage breed chickens are awesome.
Hey.
What does the term heritage breed even mean? Well, to answer that question, we have to go over a little bit of chicken history in terms of the development of the breeds of chickens that we have today. And we also have to understand that when we're talking about breeds within chickens, it's a little bit different than when we think about breeds in like cats and dogs and horses and things like that we might be a bit more familiar with. When a chicken is in a breed, that just means that it meets the appearance, the standard appearance for that breed. So a barred rock chicken will look like a barred rock chicken as set down by the poultry standard for whatever country you happen to be in. It doesn't necessarily mean that only barred rock chickens can be included in the genetic history of that chicken. So it can get a bit confusing, but just think, if you have a chicken of a certain breed, it must look like the standard prescribed for that breed. And if its parents have been that breed for generations and the baby comes out and doesn't meet the standard, then it can't be considered that breed. Most breeds of chickens that were developed before World War II would be what we consider today to be heritage breeds. So breeds in chickens are pretty crazy, the story about how they came about, and you can check out the entire full story in my Where Do Chickens Come From video. But in a nutshell, chickens were super popular in the mid to late 1800s. There was like a chicken craze that was sort of triggered by the importation of chickens from Asia into Europe and the mixing of the two sort of types of chickens to create new breeds. And everyone just sort of lost their minds about chickens and were really into it. And during this time, a lot of the breeds you recognize today sort of were developed. So your Plymouth Rocks and the modern sort of Leghorns, just so many, basically anything you think of as a heritage breed was developed in this time period. Because before this, chickens were just not that important or interesting, and no one really cared that much about them. And they were generally, if we're talking about European America, places like that, they were generally just a small, scrappy chicken running around like a bantam or a game fowl. That was mostly what a chicken was. So after the chicken craze, the chicken fanciers started their breed associations, they had chicken shows, the whole thing just sort of started as to what we essentially still have today. There are certainly some breeds that pre-existed the chicken craze. That would be things like the silky chicken, the Dorking chicken. Some of the Mediterranean breeds were sort of mostly what they are today, back before the chicken craze happened. But because of the nature of chicken breeds being, it's not about a genetically pure line, it's about the appearance of the chicken. It would be unusual probably to think that those breeds are pure and unchanged. They probably have a little bit of a lot of things mixed into them at this point in time.
Hey.
So why does any of this matter? You know, aren't all chicken breeds heritage breeds then? Well, no, because after World War II, chickens started to be specialized. They started to be bred for commercial production. So over time, they turned into the commercial egg-laying chickens, of which the white leghorn is one of them. But the modern commercial white leghorn is a very different chicken than the white leghorns that were around in the early 1900s, for example. And the broiler chicken was developed for meat. So the the trajectory of the chicken started to split into being very specialized, whereas the older breeds, they were generally considered to be dual purpose, meaning that they could lay eggs and also be pretty decent to have for a table bird. But we wanted to specialize. We wanted to make factories for chickens. We wanted to make things the most efficient possible. So we started developing chickens in these two pathways. And today it's very, very common for even backyard flock keepers to go with that modern egg-laying hybrid chicken, because it is true that they do lay a really huge number of eggs. There's nothing wrong with having those commercial type hens that are bred for super good egg laying in your backyard flock, but they do come with some health considerations because they have been bred for a very specific purpose, and they've only been bred to live for 18 months to 2 years-ish. And after that point, they tend to suffer from often quite severe reproductive issues. Now, I don't really know the ins and outs of egg laying for chickens, but it seems to me, with the experiences I've had with my flock, and I have had those commercial type hens in my flock before, but it seems like a chicken can lay a certain number of eggs. So if they lay those eggs every single day for 2 years, or if they lay those eggs every second or third day for a larger number of years, that sort of seems to be how it works. And I personally don't really love having to move on my hens because they're reaching essentially the end of their healthy lifespan, and I don't want to do that every 2 years. It's not how I like to do things around here. Something to be cautious about, even with heritage breeds, is that some lines have been developed to lay a lot of eggs. Now, if they've been developed to lay a lot of eggs, they can have similar issues to those commercial egg-laying hens, and that's sort of the situation that the white leghorn is in, because they've been developed for commercial production. And also, the more a chicken lays lots of eggs, the less their qualities as a dual-purpose bird is going to be. And while you may not want to eat your hens, you may find that you want to eat their next generation. You may want to raise roosters and the surplus have for your table if you're seeking self-sufficiency and knowing where your food comes from. And a just egg-laying hen is not going to give you a bird for the table that's really worth raising.
Hey.
So from my flock, why do I choose only heritage breed chickens? Well, for some of the reasons I've just talked about in terms of health and all of that kind of stuff. But my main reason is because I want a flock that can reproduce itself. So you can be more efficient with both producing eggs and producing meat with chickens if you go for the specialized versions. That's not in question. They are incredible animals that have been designed and developed to be so good at laying eggs and growing really, really fast. But those chickens, if you have them, you cannot reproduce them. They do not reproduce themselves. They are hybrids, and they are hybrids made from super complex secret bloodlines and all sorts of like parent stock kept specifically for that purpose, and it is a whole commercial enterprise with billions of dollars, I'm sure, attached to those specific lines. So you can't get those chicks, raise them up and let them have their own babies and get the same thing. You can do that with heritage breeds. Now, I haven't actually done that. I have let my breeds mix all up. So now most of the chickens I have are a crossbred of my foundation stock. But I started predominantly with Plymouth Barred Rocks, which I think are fantastic, and I did a video all about them, and you can check out if they're the right fit for you. But they're the foundation for my flock. Most of my chickens have maybe half, maybe a quarter of Plymouth Rock as their foundation, and they're pretty cool. They can self-reproduce. I'm not 100% sure what's going to come out, but at this point, they're all sort of mostly the same in terms of how they perform. And it is a lot more natural. So they can live in their family groups. The roosters are chill. They can hang out together. I can have more than one of them. And they are dual purpose. Some of the breeds that I had were more egg laying and some of them were more meat, but at this point they're sort of just in the middle. So if I need to eat the chickens, then they are good table birds at a relatively young age, nothing compared to a commercial meat chicken, which will be ready to process in sort of a homestead backyard situation at between 8 and 10 weeks old. They can be ready in a commercial situation as young as 6 weeks old. Well, I cannot match that performance. Nobody can. My roosters would be ready for the table by the time they're about 4 to 5 months old. So it is a huge difference, which means there's a huge difference in food consumption as well. So I'm not just wholesale saying this is the only way, but I do believe it is important that we are self-sufficient as much as possible. And those commercial breeds, they're not self-sufficient and they are not healthy across generations. They're not even healthy to a natural chicken lifespan. They cannot make it. For their own well-being, their life needs to end much, much earlier than a heritage breed chicken will be able to live for.
Hey.
Now, it is not all sunshine and rainbows when you're deciding to only go with heritage breeds. They are, like I've mentioned, less efficient than the more specialized breeds. And because they self-reproduce, the vast majority of the breeds will go broody, which means they're going to want to sit on eggs and raise their own babies, which is fantastic if you want to raise chicks. But generally, the hens are going to want to raise a lot more chicks than you want to raise every year, which means you have to manage broodiness. Or they're not going to lay eggs for you the entire period of time that they're broody, and it can be not so great for their health to just let them sit if they're not going to hatch any chicks. And there are times where I will come out to the chicken coop and find 5 hens having decided to go broody all at once. And I'm like, come on, guys, like this is ridiculous. You just have to manage the situation. So that's a choice you need to be willing to make. There is a bit more management in terms of keeping everything ticking over because you really can't just leave 5 hens sitting broody. You're not getting eggs and it's not good for their health and they're cranky and grumpy and make egg collecting not fun. So that is a main factor to consider. The bigger ones, the dual purpose, which I keep, they eat a lot. They eat a lot and they don't lay that many eggs. They lay pretty well when they're in their first season. You'll probably get a good 5 eggs a week from them, but then they slow down quite a bit and you're looking at maybe 3 or 4 eggs a week, sort of for the rest of the next few years of their lives until they sort of slow right down. And they also tend to lay very seasonally. So all chickens lay seasonally, but some more than others. Your heritage breeds are highly likely to lay you lots of eggs in the springtime and the autumn, and not so many in summer and winter. So they're very, very seasonal. Now there are breeds like particularly the egg-laying heritage breeds, which tend to be lighter in their bodies. They may have had broodiness bred out of them, so you're not going to have that issue. Most leghorns don't go broody. And honestly, most of the barred rocks that I've had don't go broody very often. I have had it happen, but it's nothing compared to the other breeds that I have. So in New Zealand, we have Orpingtons, and they're like the British Orpingtons in type, not so much like the American Orpingtons. And man, Orpingtons like to go broody a lot. And there's quite a bit of Orpington blood running through some of my chickens, and they just go broody. And broody, and broody, and it's a management situation. So to recap some of the negatives here, they eat a lot, They don't lay anywhere near as frequently as an egg-laying specific breed or the commercial breeds lay, and they go broody. But those are really the only negatives, in my opinion, and they're not really negatives. They have a bit of a positive as well, because the less number of eggs means that your chicken will keep laying for much longer. I have hens that are over 5 years old and they are still laying eggs. Not as many as when they were in their first and second seasons, but enough to make it still worthwhile them being here. And because they live for a long time, comparatively speaking, they are able to form stable flock relationships, and you are able to get a culture developing in your flock where the older hens teach the younger hens how things go here, there, where they live. And it is really, really nice to see. And when you are allowing your flock to breed, you get to see those characteristics start flowing through your whole flock as a sort of a family, generational over time. And I think that's really incredible. Because I've let my breeds sort of cross together, now I'm not doing that willy-nilly. I do have a plan in mind, and I have a video about that when I talk about breeding in a free-range situation. But because they are mixed up, it really is great when they have babies, because I have no idea exactly how those babies are going to grow up. They can be all sorts of different colors, different temperaments, different body shapes, but ultimately they all have characteristics that the flock has moving forward as a whole, and I find that really very interesting and fulfilling.
Hey.
So those are the reasons why I keep heritage breeds in my flock, and only heritage breeds. For me, it's really important to be as self-sustaining as possible. And I don't mean self-sufficient, because no one can be fully and 100% self-sufficient, but self-sustaining. These chickens can sustain themselves over time. And it's also important to me, where possible in this modern world we live in, to not engage with things that exploit living beings. And the overbred nature of the commercial modern chickens feels very uncomfortable to me, that those chickens cannot live their natural chicken lives because of what we humans have done to them. Even in perfect conditions, they are going to run into issues because they weren't designed for perfect conditions. They were designed for factories. I understand why those chickens were developed, and I understand that there may be a need for that sort of animal and the sort of systems that they live in, but that has no place in my backyard farm, and that is why I choose heritage breed chickens.